The first thing on the agenda is confirmation of minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of March 2019. The minutes have been circulated to members and the Secretariat has not received any proposal for amendments. If members have no objection, then the minutes are confirmed. No objection, all right. Information papers issued since the meeting on the 6th of May 2019. We have got 3. For details, please refer to our agenda. The date of our next meeting, in fact, for the July regular meeting, it has been scheduled for the 8th, on Monday. However, the administration has got no proposal for discussion. So, do members have other suggestions? If not, can we cancel the July regular meeting? Thank you. Please invite the Financial Secretary to come in to give us a briefing on Hong Kong's latest overall economic situation. Financial Secretary, over to you for an update on Hong Kong's latest economic situation. Members and Chairman of the Board, good morning. I'd like to brief you on the latest situation in Hong Kong because of the China-U.S. conflict and also the international headwinds. We have seen some problem economy, and the IMF downgraded the economic forecast growth to 3.3%, the lowest in the recent few years. However, there is still hope that there can be some improvement in the later part of this year. OECD and also the UN has downwardly adjusted the global economic growth for this year, and there is a risk of downward development of the economy, and because of the extra tariffs imposed by the U.S. on China imports, and also a series of measures against China enterprises, and also the countermeasures adopted by China, there are increasing risk for the global economy, and sentiments are growing negative. Earlier this year, there was a general expectations that the U.S.-China trade conflicts could be successfully resolved, but now it did not happen as expected. There was a drop of 9% in our stock market, and the largest since the adjustment last year. And then the economic situation in Europe has also been weak, and there are many uncertainties. And because of geopolitical tensions in many parts of the world, there are a lot of risks, and we cannot overlook them. Hong Kong is a small, open economy.
Earlier this year, we estimated that we've already considered all those factors in making an assessment of the economy. Because of the trade friction, it's difficult to predict how things will follow. Play out. So we will cautiously make an assessment. Later on, I will now to report to members about the performance of the global economy. In the first quarter, the main economy performed better than expected. Year on year, there was a 6.4% growth compared with same as the fourth quarter of last year. All the data indicates that for the first 4 months together, overall, the economy has remained steady. Although the global economy and the U.S.-China trade frictions are causes for concern, but the basic foundation of the economy in the mainland is sound. Furthermore, the authorities have carried out a series of macro measures which can help ensure that the economy can grow by 6.2 to 6.5%. In the long term, the mainland will increase in domestic demand and also migrate towards high technology, and also will further open up and also promote the Belt and Road Initiative and the Greater Bay Area development. All that will be conducive to the long term, to improve the quality of the long-term economic development. In the U.S., although there was the U.S. economy grew because of the increase in inventory, however, private consumption and fixed investment have slowed down. In the first 4 months, both retail and industrial production had also the growth rate has slowed down compared with the fourth quarter of last year. The labor market, however, is still strong. Inflation rate is moderate. The U.S. economy still has moderate growth this year, but I believe that growth will be less than that of last year. In Europe, for the first quarter, there was only a moderate growth in the economy. Major economies like Germany and Italy also registered slow growth. The economic growth for the Euro region will be slower than that of last year. Brexit negotiations have yet to see any breakthrough. The EU and Britain had agreed to postpone the negotiations until the end of October. Whether or not Britain can have a smooth Brexit is still uncertain. In Asia, the Japanese economy, expanded moderately in the first quarter. For the rest of Asia, like Singapore, Korea, and Taiwan, the growth rate had also slowed down. By comparison, the developing Asian economies have benefited from vibrant domestic demand, and as a result, remain, steady. Over the last 5 years, the Asian economy made up about 6% of the global economic growth. Going forward, they will remain the important engine of global growth. Given the global environment and the trade friction for this year, I think the prospect is still the growth is moderate. And for monetary policy, the U.S. monetary policy has been relaxed, so the government will remain station. The market expected the Fed will not raise interest rate this year in light of the deteriorating economy and the mild inflation rate. And the central bank in Europe and Japan had this year also adopted rather lenient monetary policy. But the interest rate movement in the U.S. is still uncertain. Locally, the global economy earlier this year was weak, and given all the unfavorable external factors and also the high basis registered last year, the year-on-year growth for the first quarter of this year in Hong Kong slowed down to a moderate growth of 0.6%. Given the unfavorable external environment, which has slowed down production and trade in Asia, the overall, visible export that was down 4.1%, like many other Asian economies. In April, the overall, export remained weak. That has been consecutive decline for 6 months. Service, export slowed down to about 1.1% of growth. This has actually this is supported by the continued increase in number of visitors. Domestic demand also lacked momentum. Given the challenging external environment, the global economy, I think private consumption are only up 0.5%. And the reason for the moderate growth is because we had a higher, baseline last year. Retail volume also was weak and was down 2% year on year. For April, the drop was 4.5%. That is overall, investment. It is also adversely by the external environment, and it's down 7.1% year on year. Labor market remained, strong, and employment rate remained at 2.8%, a 20-year low. Wages and income continue to grow steadily. Actual growth actually cover most industries. Basic the underlying CPI went up by 2.7% compared with 2.9% in the last quarter last year. There was a moderate decline. Inflation rate in the near term will remain mild. for this year, the underlying CPI will go up by 2.5%. For the property market, given that earlier on the market had concern about the U.S.-China, the U.S. concern regarding the trade friction has eased, property market improved, and also the market does not expect further increase in interest rate, and therefore the property market rebounded and the number of turnovers increased. From January to April, on average, there is 5,400 transactions in the property market this year, compared with the average of last year. There was an upsurge of 82%. Property prices went up for 4 consecutive months. Compared with December last year, there was a rebound of 9%. Compared with the peak in July last year, it's only 1% less than that. The property market in May remained buoyant. The property prices in April this year, compared with peak of 1997, was 120% higher. The mortgage to income ratio stayed at 69%, which means that property market prices are already excessively above the affordability of the public. The government over the years have been working hard to increase land supply. With such efforts in the last 3, 4, 5 years, there's a total supply in housing supply. I think as at the end of March, they will remain at the peak of 39,000 units. From 29, the average number of flats completed will be 18,800 per year. That's about 100% above the average for the last 5 years. The government will actively continue to monitor the property market and ensure the health and monitor the healthy development of the property market. With that, I will now ask the economic advisor to give members an overview of the economy before we answer questions. Next, I'd like to walk members through the latest economic situation and our forecast. Given that the global economy this year had not performed very satisfactorily, especially because of the impact of the Sino-US trade friction, the global trade has not performed very well. Against that backdrop, for the first quarter, the economic growth was only 0.6% year on year. Of course, this is because the economic growth in the same period last year was 4.6%. So we have a higher, benchmark to compare with last year. So, and the export has also down 4.1%. So you can see that the trade friction has affected not just Hong Kong, but also the rest of Asia. For domestic demand, regarding private consumption, the year-on-year growth is 0.2%. As the FS said, that's because for the first quarter of last year, private consumption expenditure increased by 8.9%. Investment expenditure, given the cautious investment sentiment since the second half of last year, overall investment performance was rather poor. Given that the economic momentum has slowed down, but the labor market has remained tight, and we're basically in a state of full employment. The latest unemployment figure is 2.8%, still a very low level. Compared with the CPI index, basically has remained mild. The underlying CPI for the fourth quarter of last year was 2.9%, and for the whole of this year is 2.7%. Given that the labor market is still very tight, one can see that the latest figure indicates that the monthly household income has still improved. From the PowerPoint, you can see several indicators. For example, household median monthly household income for the first quarter was 4%. If you discount the rate of inflation, the actual growth increases to 1.8%. Against that background, the number of low-income households has remained at a low level. For the first quarter, it's 2.9%. As for the local property market, In the second half of last year, the property market had an adjustment, but starting from the beginning of this year, during the first quarter, we heard many good news about the Sino-U.S. trade talks, and there were, expectation that there won't be any, increase in interest rate in the U.S., and therefore property prices went up for the first 4 months of this year, and compared with the peak in July last year, it's only down by 1%. Property transactions also went up for the first 4 months. The total number of property transactions was 5,400 per month, which is higher than 3,000 in the fourth quarter of last year. As for the home purchase affordability index, it still stay at a high level of 69% in the first quarter, which is above 44% of the the long-term the average for the last 20 years. As the government tries hard to increase land supply and the supply of housing units, in the end of March, the government's projection is that for the next 3 to 4 years, the supply of private residential units will still remain at a high level of 93,000. If we look at the total number of residential units completed in recent years, again, there has been an increase. Last year, for example, it was 21,000 units, which is far above the average for the last 10 years, namely 12,900. For this year and next year, number of private residential units to be completed will remain at a high level, above 20,000 per annum. Next, outlook for the remainder of this year. Of course, this will depend on the state of the external economy, especially the performance of major economies in the mainland. Although it is facing some headwinds in terms of external trade, but the overall performance of the economy remains steady this year. The domestic demand in the mainland, for example, retail turnover and increase in investment, although they both slow down, but they still register very solid growth. As for the U.S., performance in the first quarter was better than expected. The growth rate was 3.2%. This was partly due to short-term factors like sharp increase in inventories. If you look at private, consumption expenditure and fixed income expenditure for the first quarter, they both dropped. So the economic growth for the U.S. economy this year will be slower than that of last year. In mid-April, the IMF revised the forecast for the global economy. They forecast that the global economy will grow by 3.3%. For the U.S., it will go down from 2.9% last year to 2.3%. For the mainland, the forecast is that it will still remain. It will achieve a growth rate of 6.3%, which is compatible with the government's forecast of 6 to 6.5%. Obviously, the Hong Kong economy will still continue to face uncertainties. Other than the trade friction, the escalation of the trade friction between the U.S. and China, there are other uncertainties which affect the global economy, including Brexit and also geopolitical, tension and so on. However, since this year, there have been some positive developments in the external environment. For example, the performance of the main economy is still better than expected. The emerging economies in Asia also remain steady and stable. The Census and Statistics Department conducted a survey in March and April this year, which showed that the local business sentiment, while still prudent, had registered some improvement. This index normally will actually help predict the future performance of the economy.
Large enterprises will continue to hire in the second quarter, so we believe the labor market will still remain stable in the short term. But please note that the survey was done between March and April by the CNSD, so the Sino-U.S. trade tensions were not really factored in yet. Because of the global economic challenges, which was more or less expected previously. So we maintain the economic forecast to be 2 to 3%. However, there is still a lot of uncertainties ahead, and if the trade conflicts cannot be resolved in the short term, then the global economy as well as Hong Kong's situation will be affected. We'll keep an eye on the situation. For inflation, the inflationary pressure will remain modest. We will keep our forecast of underlying inflation rate or headline inflation rate at 2.5%. So that ends my presentation. Thank you. In relation to the government's report, 4 members have indicated they want to ask questions. Chen Chen-ying, Roy Kwan, Shiu Ka-fai, and Wong Ting-kwong, and Regina Yip. Mr. Ronick Chen, thank you. There are uncertainties associated with the trade tensions. So the global economy did not start well this year. So in terms of exports of goods and services and private consumptions and so forth, we have seen a drop. And then yesterday, a white paper was issued on the trade tensions between China and the U.S. Given the large downward pressure on our economy, the government may expand public expenditure to resolve the problem. Now, when we invest in infrastructure, there are many controversies, and we have invested heavily in innovation technology already. And I don't think many people will oppose the construction of PRH. So will the government boost public expenditure to stimulate our economy? And then in the conclusion, it said that employment is the best way for people to move out of poverty. And so the government will continue to encourage people to be reliant and will enhance employment training. And then last week, we passed a motion by Mr. Kok Wai Keung to enhance support for those who are over 65 and over 60, and then there should be traffic subsidy for those aged between 60 and 64. Can you implement these measures as soon as possible so that they can also enjoy the $2 traffic concession so that they'll be encouraged to seek employment? Now, we have introduced a lot of harsh measures to control growth in the property sector, and yet we still have so many cases per month. And in April, we had 500 cases of new transactions. So these harsh measures are not really effective. And there are reports that there may be tax avoidance cases. People pretend to be first-time home buyers. In fact, 60 flat owners purchased 62 units and costing $1 billion, and then a lot of stamp duty revenue was forgone. So will you amend the measures so the people who have not been property owners for a few years can only be entitled to the exemption of stamp duty under the first-time buyers measures? Thank you. Yes, there are headwinds in the global economy. Mr. Chen asked whether we will increase public expenditure. Now, our public expenditure will not be be reduced because of poor performance economy leading to lower revenue. And Mr. Chen asked whether we can do more in terms of land supply and housing. Now, for transport infrastructure and flat production, this government has always accorded top priority to such items. So if there are such projects, we give them priority. Now, if the economy is not doing well, Well, from the perspective of supporting the enterprises and boosting economy, can we look for more projects? Yes, that can be studied. And as for the $2 fare subsidy, now for those who are between 65 years old, they are entitled to that, but they have views that those who are retired and aged between 60 and 64 should be entitled to the same subsidy to encourage the young olds to seek employment. Now, but I think we have to consider this further first because the implications can be quite wide. And we cannot say that we give a $2 fare subsidy to those who are 60 to 64 and working and not to the retirees. Yes, there regarding the buoyant property market. Now, some of them try to avoid the BSD and DSD. Now, for the former, the ratio is very low, and for the latter, is just a single digit. We had over 7,000 transactions on the whole in April. So the ratio is still not, the proportion is still not very high. And as for people who make themselves first-time home buyers, well, we are aware of such reports from the media. We have taken note of that. Thank you. Mr. Roy Kwan, each member will have 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, FS. The trade tensions are escalating, and then the overall exports has been falling for 6 months in a row. So I do not see anything from the paper as regards what is the FS comment on the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance. The FS may have some views about that, but then the FOO will be passed quite soon. And what is the FS assessment on our economic outlook and future, or is there no impact at all according to the FS? Thank you. For our overall economic situation, I gave an analysis of the economic and political situation in the external environment, and then also the impact of the global economic situation on our own economy. A heated debate is going on with regard to the amendments to the FOO in the community. Last Friday, Mr. Kwame noted that the SAR government submitted a paper to the security panel, and the Secretary for Security and colleagues are trying to explain the adjustments contained in the paper to the Council. So for commercial crimes, they have been now removed in the first stage from the list. And suspected fugitives in the ordinance. Now we have raised the threshold for extraditable offences to focus on more serious crimes. We hope that the controversies over the FOO can be resolved the soonest possible, so that we can refocus our energy on how to develop our economy. The FOO will be amended in several ways, and we can then be more focused and targeted, and we have added safeguards administratively. We believe that to a large extent, the concerns from the business sector have been addressed. We'll continue to keep an eye on the economic situation. and promote economic growth on various fronts. Thank you. However, there are still a lot of concerns. Just next door, we have another meeting going on this subject because the business sector is concerned that when a bill is passed with a retrospective effect, the threshold is a maximum penalty of 7 years, and then in the criminal law of the CPC, there can retrospective effect can be imposed by the NPCSC. So the business sector is not really relieved. Out there is the U.S.-China Sino trade row, and internally we have the worries over the FOO, and I've yet to hear from the FS how we're going to deal with that. Amendments to the FOO having added various safeguards, and I think to a large extent we have mitigate the worries of the business sector. And there are concerns about our business in asset management and wealth management. Now we have taken note of these concerns. If the wealth management business if as a result of the amendments, proceeds from bribery and corruption cannot stay in Hong Kong to benefit our asset management business, I believe that we don't mind that, because we don't want process of crime to stay in Hong Kong. However, we do believe that there is a great potential in development of our wealth management sector. Now, in the wealth management sector, there's been a lot of discussion about family businesses. That is, people who are founders of such companies, they may consider where their team should station. In this regard, Hong Kong is very competitive. We have some discussions with the sector recently. In terms of tax reliefs, we are trying to consider measures to enhance our competitiveness so that such business can be domiciled in Hong Kong. So we are doing a lot in this regard. Mr. Shu Kafai. Thank you, FS, for being in the council this morning to explain to us the latest economic situation. Earlier this year, I had a meeting with the FS and to discuss with him the retail sector. And then the FS said to me that Kafai retail outlook would not be very good, and if there is anything the government can do to help the retail sector, do let me know earlier. So I think the Secretary's prediction was very correct, and the retail sector has reflected to me that they face a lot of challenges. Their business, to put it simply, is rather bad. And there is also the impact of Brexit and also the U.S.-Sino trade war. Well, things are in a flux. Yesterday, there was a paper issued by the country. They want to have a good discussion with the U.S., but who is ever shifting the goalpost, and the impact on the retail sector. Now, we also have the wholesale and also import sectors that are being affected, and also logistics and transport industries are also affected. So all in all, the economy in Hong Kong is going to be greatly affected. People are saying that the renminbi exchange rate is dropping. So if the Hong Kong dollar gets stronger, then people cannot come from the mainland to shop in Hong Kong.
The data shows that the index for domestic consumption and also confidence has slowed down, also together with the drop in number of visitors. Another point which I like to make is that many people in the retail industry has found out that in the last year or so that when the visitors return to the mainland, as they go through different, custom points, many and the custom officers will search their, luggage. For example, if they carry merchandise worth more than $5,000, they'll need to pay tax. As a result, more and more people are now they're not spend too much when they come. For example, some of the dry seafoods have been imported from the mainland. The visitors come and buy them in Hong Kong, and when they bring them back to the mainland, they will be subject to tax, and therefore so all that would really hit the retail industry. So I hope the FS can help us here and try to reflect our concern to the customs authorities in the mainland. If people buy these products for their own use, I think it's a good thing, and it will also help the retail industry here. So I hope the FS can help us here. Secondly, regarding the question of the labor shortage, as Mr. Au said, over a long period of time, Hong Kong has been experiencing full employment. Last time I said that in a report, I think in 2018, for 3 industries, we have 170,000 jobs for which we have nobody for which there is, there are vacancies. So, and our rents are also becoming, more and more expensive. So I hope that the government, I can also ask the FS to make relaxations to allow us to import labor so that we can improve our competitiveness. Thank you, Mr. Siu Ka-Fai, for your suggestions and your reminder of the things that we need to follow up on. After our meeting today, we will certainly follow up on the points raised by Mr. Siu. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, thank you. The U.S. has started the trade war with China, and I don't think the dispute can be resolved shortly. One can say that we need to be prepared, that we have to go through a period during which we need to tighten our belts. At the moment, the hot topic is how the U.S.-China, Sino-U.S. trade friction will affect Hong Kong. According to Professor Lau Junyi, even if the trade war were really, go on full scale, it will only affect the GDP by 2%. It can only slow down the economic growth of the mainland. It will not really turn the economic growth rate in mainland into negative numbers. It will also affect the U.S. too much. The worst impact will be roughly 1% of the GDP. So my question for the FS is this: for the current trade war between China and the U.S., what will be the actual impact? Other than our exports, the retail industry, and the tourism industry, which which can now immediately feel the impact. For the other industries and sectors of our economy, will they be subject to less impacts? Thank you, Mr. Wong. Regarding the escalation of the Sino-U.S. trade friction, it's difficult to predict how this will play out. Well, we don't know whether or not they will be able to reach a cordial agreement, and whether the trade friction will further escalate. It's difficult to say. As far as trade is concerned, merchandise passing through Hong Kong from China to the U.S. and vice versa, it's down by 9%. I think the risk is still manageable, But for those industries which are directly affected, of course, they are now facing a tough time, and we're now looking into how we can help them. On our part, other than trade, we are also concerned about the unfavorable external environment and how that will affect the investment sentiment and also the the sentiment in our financial market, whether it will and thus resulting in instability and volatility in the financial market. I think we've conducted detailed studies here in this regard, and we have made some preparation at the economic level. Another point that we are concerned that if the trade friction were to further escalate, how this will affect the global supply chain. At the moment, the mainland is the largest manufacturing state in the world. Whether or not the tariff will affect some production processes and whether these production processes will be relocated out of the mainland, we cannot rule that out. At the same time, given the large production capacity and the supply chain in the mainland, we read from the media very often about facilities moving out of the mainland. In the short term, this may not be done on a large scale, but for the medium and long term, the impact could be serious. So we therefore think that we still think there is a silver lining despite the gloomy environment, and that is in the developing economies of Asia. Now, because of the trade war and also the rapid economic growth in the developing economies of Asia and the ever increasing middle class, trade among Asian countries have continued to grow. So for Hong Kong, we also encourage our local business people to explore such opportunities through different funds, and we're also doing some work to support the relevant sectors, and we're happy to explore and work together with LegCo members to address the concern of the sector and see how we can help. If I may follow up. Yes. Well, the FS mentioned the financial sector, and this is what I'm concerned about. We all can see that whenever Donald Trump makes a comment in public, there would be an immediate reaction in the stock market. Over this period, we've seen this happening several times. So what measures does the FS have to maintain the stability of a financial market? Thank you. Perhaps I can come back to this point after I've answered the other questions. Is it my turn now, Chairman? For FS and Mr. Au, Hong Kong is a small open economy. We have always been subject to the external influence, and I fully understand that. That has been the case for the last century. It takes time to promote our productivity. So can you immediately do something to lower the business cost and also, relieve the burden on the general public? Take, for example, the MTR. You're the major shareholder. You should ask them to reduce their fares. Although there is a fare adjustment mechanism, you can tell them that people's incomes are not increasing very much and prices are so expensive. Also, all the government fees and charges, license fees for hawker stores in markets and so on, all these are within your control, and I think you should reduce them. And as for trade and logistics, which are severely affected, I've learned from the logistics sector that the container terminals in Kwaichung are no longer fully utilized. So could you lease them at a lower rate? I think they're not able to afford it. So I'd like the FS to consider coming up with more measures to lower the cost of doing business and to also relieve the burden of the public. Of course, you cannot regulate the rent in commercial shopping centers, but for in public housing estates, you're not willing to lower the rents in the shopping centers. Instead, that in Ablay Chow Estate West, the tenants in the shopping center have been evicted, and the shopping center is now subject to renovation, and the old tenants may not be able to have their lease renew. So could you take the opportunity to talk to the owners? They won't meet with us. They will only ask the PR to meet with us. So we have to rely on you. Thank you, Mrs. Yip, for your questions and suggestions. Mrs. Yip is right. Going forward, how we can help the business sector to lower their costs so that in face of the adversity they can still continue with the business. And this is something that we are willing to do. Mrs. Yip made several suggestions. For example, rents for the backup areas in the container terminal. I think the question has been made. The proposed we're now exploring to that. Regarding shopping centers in public housing estates, I will also follow up on your suggestion regarding government fees and charges, and whether or not they could be frozen or waived. We will look at it globally. As for the railway corporation, the MTRC is a listed company, so given that there is a fair adjustment mechanism, so we may not be directly able to do anything. But in terms of the heavy transportation, the cost of the expensive transportation costs, the CE has already launched measures to provide some subsidies. So this is how we're handling the situation at the moment. Thank you. Mr. Uchiwai, thank you. I'd like to make 2 points. First of all, given the latest state of the economy is that our unemployment rate is only 2.8%. Any economic studies will say that this is almost tantamount to full employment. At the same time, however, the business environment is still doing well, and there are many job vacancies. So the FS therefore will have to come up with an overall strategy to deal with this problem. If you cannot resolve this problem, the reality is that the business operating costs will continue to go up, because with limited labor supply and more job vacancies in the market, how can we resolve that? So normally you can adopt several strategies. We can consider moving towards automation so that we can release some spare human resources. Will there be some policy consideration so that if we could, resort to automation, or whether or not this will be the trend going forward? Secondly, would the government consider help in terms of employment by women, and also those who have retired in their 50s, and how we can help them take up employment again? This may not be within the purview of the FS. It could be, the responsibility of the Labor and Welfare Bureau. But as far as your policies are concerned, would you make it one of your policy objectives so that you could adopt a bolder approach and also allocate resources to help?
Lastly, I'd like to point out that the cost of business is a big issue, because if the operating costs continue to rise, then it would affect the choices available to the public. Now, for rent, it may not be something that is hard to resolve because it has something to do with the macro environment. But shouldn't there be the policy from the government to allow street economic activities to adjust so that there can be more options for people? People don't have to spend their lifelong savings to start a business, because after all, 10 out of 8 startups may fail in the end. So there should be strategies to help people who want to start their business to have an easier threshold so that they can start their business easier. FS. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, for your questions and suggestions. Mr. Wu talked about how we can enhance women participation in the labor market and how we can help the elderly and young people to start their own business. We are happy to support them in terms of resources, and whether automation can reduce the demand of manpower. Yes, we are happy to consider this. Mr. Wu might have noted that for SMEs, we have a technology voucher to encourage them to adopt technology and automation. We have raised the amount of subsidy from $200,000 to $400,000. As for street-level economic activities, I get your point, but there are considerations in terms of location. Some SMEs rent their premises. They have to pay rent to do business. If just next to their shops, there can be stores and bazaars, and people can operate rent-free, then it is unfair to the SME shops. I think you are talking about the government being more lenient if new startups can find a place to do their business, and we should allow them more room to survive. I think I'm talking about fair and bazaars. We have, I'm just talking about street. I'm not talking about street market. I'm talking about bazaars, hawker bazaars. I think we can have more regular hawker bazaars. Yes, then I think the hawker bazaar in some shape that popped up during the Chinese New Year came to mind, and they are not always there, but then at Chinese New Year, people are allowed to sell their own handcrafts and even their hometown home specialties and snacks they can sell there. Yes, this can be considered. Mr. Kenneth Leung, Deputy Chairman. Well, the FS just gave us a briefing of the economic situation. There are both opportunities and crises. Although there's problem with the U.S., in fact, in Asia, in countries from the Middle East in particular, I think there is still room for us to develop. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have mutual investment agreement with countries from the Middle East. And I know that the FS talked about policies related to family office. I think many Middle East families are interested in setting up family offices in Hong Kong. I'd like to know what the government has done so far in this regard and what plans does it have. Another issue may not be directly related, but is relevant to our labor market. An unemployment rate of 2.7% is close to a state of full employment. The many professional sectors, including the accounting sectors, have said that they have difficulties in filling their vacancies. And the accounting sector faces a similar problem. Since we have mutual investment agreements with ASEAN countries, and in these agreements, there is the clause for flow of people between the party states. So would there be a measure in the next budget to allow graduates from ASEAN countries with mutual investment agreements with us so that they can come to work in Hong Kong for 3 years? Because many of the graduates from these countries would like to work in Hong Kong because in Hong Kong they can have access to quality professional training, and then they can take the relevant professional examination. So can we give them a visa period of 3 years for them to work in Hong Kong? FS? Thank you. And how to attract more family offices to Hong Kong? We are studying the subject and we are discussing with various departments, and the measures will cover tax measures. I'm afraid I cannot divulge the details at this stage. Well, when family officers come to Hong Kong, then on the one hand we can have quality job opportunities, and they can bring capital to benefit the development of Hong Kong as well as the GBA, Great Bay Area, and we should attract private equity funds to be domiciled in Hong Kong, and we are studying the relevant measures as well. We should attract capital to Hong Kong to promote our development, and we can then create more quality jobs. Mr. Mr. Kenneth Leung talked about places with mutual investment agreements with us, and their graduates may want to acquire professional qualifications. Hong Kong is a world financial center, and of course, we are the leader in many professional services. So you propose a period of 3 years. That is a period of time for them to stay in Hong Kong to work and acquire professional status. And this will also help to fill our manpower gap. And then we can export our advantage. Graduates can come to Hong Kong, acquire the professional status, and after they return to their countries, they can then export our professional standards back to the countries. There will be connection both emotionally and professionally with Hong Kong. And this will bring positive impacts for Hong Kong if would like to invest in these places. And I think there are merits in Mr. Leung's proposal. We have to study them further. Thank you. Thank you, FS. Lastly, FS, I have a question for you too. In February, when you delivered the budget speech, you already expected that it won't be all plain sailing for the talks between the U.S. and China, and you cautioned us to be careful of storms ahead, and you said that there is always silver lining behind the gray clouds. So many Chinese technology stocks are now being affected, and Alibaba may come to Hong Kong to list in Hong Kong. Will you discuss with the stock exchange? Because if we have that, then there is that may bring us some hope, and then this will also help the development of the GBA. Thank you, Chairman, for your question. Last year, when we amended our listing rules, one of the items was to encourage technology shares that stocks that were listed overseas to come back to Hong Kong for secondary listing. One of the objectives of our amendments to the listing rules was that. So for some technology enterprises that have been listed in the U.S. are of large scale, if they can be listed in Hong Kong as well, that is to their advantage. After all, Hong Kong, China is their origin and of development, and if they come back, then it will be conducive to the development of our stock market as well, and therefore we will support the Hong Kong efforts in this regard. And as for what measures will we have, and what we can do to promote technology enterprises. Well, in the trade round, we can now see the advantage and special role played by Hong Kong under one country, two systems. We can attract quality talent to Hong Kong. We can encourage special enterprises and INT companies to Hong Kong. We have a unique role to play, and the government is working very hard on this. In the budget, we said that $10 billion have been set aside to set up two platforms, one for AI, another for robotics. One for AI and robotics, and other is for medicine. We are progressing well, and we hope that in the second half of this year we can make some announcements so that people know that we have our characteristics, we have our attractiveness, we can attract top-notch universities and R&D institutes to come to Hong Kong for R&D in application. We want to encourage INT enterprises to come to Hong Kong. Thank you. Mr. Roy Kwan, you want to speak for the second time. Please be brief. 2 minutes, please. Thank you. Some people like to ask you questions related to livelihood. Now, the IHVS has introduced a tax rebate. However, 80% of the people have misunderstood that they have a reduction in tax of $8,000. In fact, it will just be a few $1,000s. And also for the cash handout of $4,000, it's been reported that things within the office are very chaotic, and then they have outsourced workers to help computer input, and they're worried as to when they can receive that $4,000. I asked an oral question in electrical sitting. So what about the question of missing application forms, and how are you going to deal with the chaos there?
Thank you. Regarding tax deduction for the voluntary medical insurance, for every policy or for every individual, in respect of the medical insurance they've taken up, there will be deduction for the amount of coverage that they've taken up. The ceiling is $8,000 per person. But if the taxpayers is helping his parents or children or spouse to take up the insurance coverage, he is also entitled to the tax deductions. Thank you for the reminder. I'll go back and talk to my colleagues to see how we can make a clarification to help the public understand. Secondly, regarding the caring fund, I hope you will, give indulgence to the work of our staff in that office. They are now working very hard. Total number of applications received more than 3.4 million. All these applications have been acknowledged. If people have submitted application forms, have not yet received any acknowledgement, they should get in touch with the office concerned. I think at the moment the office of all for applications received and for which acknowledgements have been sent out, they are now focusing their attention on dispersing the payment. Starting from today, I think that making 16,000 payments every day. As our colleagues focus more on the payment, I think going forward we will be able to handle more payments every year. It is our target that we'll be able to finish complete the task by the end of this year and have the payments dispersed to all the members of the public. So I think time is up for this item, and I'd like to thank the FS and his team. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. Right. Our second item is enhancing support for tax policy unit. We'll now invite the administration to join us, or they're already here. So I'd like to thank the team from the FSTB attending our meeting. First of all, I'd like to invite the Permanent Secretary, Ms. Alice Lau, to walk us through the paper. Thank you. As you all know, that the FS in the budget this year announced that starting from July 1st this year, the tax policy unit under the FSTB will be transferred to be directly under the office of the Financial Secretary. No additional resources will be required, and at the time the FS already mentioned that we may need to allocate more resources Given that our tax policy is getting more and more complex, the tax policy unit, once it is transferred to be under the FS office, they will need directorate support. We also believe that the FS, when preparing the framework for the budget and follow up on proposals in respect of the budget and coordinating all the efforts, he would need more resources to do that. So when the TPU is being transferred out to be under the FS office, it will be renamed the Budget and Tax Policy Unit. We recommend that a directorate staff at D4 level should be appointed. Other than the existing resources of the TPU, an additional senior assessor and senior assistant secretary will be hired to provide additional support. And we are here to listen to members' views regarding this suggested proposal. Mr. Chen Zhenying. Okay, thank you. First of all, I have to. I first of all like to say that I support the proposed restructuring because it can enhance the support. I understand that the TPU at the moment there are 4 colleagues in the current TPU. In future, the BTPU will have 7 staff. According to the paper, the person in charge could be an administrative officer or could be recruited from the open market. So I'd like to ask the PS to tell us what are the qualification requirements so that we can recommend people to apply for this post of the head of the unit. I understand that for the 7 staff, 7 vacancies, there are some vacancies, for example, the senior administrative officer, the senior secretary, those positions are still vacant. But while the budget has just been announced, but very soon you will have to work on the next budget. So for these vacancies, is there a deadline for the government to fill those vacancies? That's my second question. Thirdly, the paper. For example, for the senior tax researcher, senior administrative officers, and so on, we're given the salaries, but we don't know the salaries of the staff from the Treasury unit. So I'd like to know what is the total, staff expenditure for the 7 staff under the new BT PU, so that we know whether or not there is a drastic increase. Thank you. First of all, regarding the qualification requirements, in Annex A of the paper, we have stipulated that after the unit has been expanded, we've listed the terms of reference of the administrative officer staff concerned. As we said, when we propose to create any post, we would like to ensure some flexibility. In the light of the job requirement, we may resort to internal deployment, namely an administrative officer at D4 to fill the vacancy, or it's also possible that that we can go for external recruitment. At the moment, the arrangement is that at the moment we are inclined to deploy an administrative officer from internal within the civil service to fill the post. In future, if we think there is a need for external recruitment, I think we will have to consider the nature of the work for this post. So this is only hypothetical. Given that this is a budget and tax policy unit, if in future at some point in terms of tax matters we need a certain type of expertise, then at that time we will consider to go for open recruitment. So in the light of the job requirements, and we will consider the background, the professional background and academic qualifications of the staff we require, and we'll make the announcements accordingly. Mr. Chen also noted that in Annex B, for the new unit, indeed, on the one hand, we have some colleagues in the current TPU who will be, transferred to the BDPU. As for the vacancies which have not yet been filled yet, including the posts yet to be created, because we have put forward the proposal to members today, and we still need to go to the ESC and the FC before we can create a post of the administrative officer, senior administrative officer. We hope that we will be able to fill the vacancy after we have the approval, the funding approval. For the senior personal secretary, he is responsible for supporting the head of the unit. So after the post of the head is being filled, then we will also fill the post of the senior personal secretary. For the senior administrative officer, this is or an already existing post, except that no one is filling that vacancy at the moment. As he is transferred to the TPU, that in light of the work requirements, we can fill that post vacancy through internal deployment. Mr. Chen Kim-po, I think the proposal, it is necessary that we can transfer the TPU to be under the FS office is necessary. I think all over the world, different jurisdictions are lowering the corporate profit tax. So how can we ensure that in Hong Kong we have reasonable tax revenue is very important. I therefore really support the new arrangement. Mr. Kenneth Leung, thank you. I also support this proposal, but my question is that for the TPU, which will be established under the FS office, FSO, compare with the current tax policy unit, will the head of this unit be attending the meetings of the tax advisory committee? Although you only have 7 staff in your establishment, but the members of the tax coordinating committee, I think they could become part-time members of your policy unit. So have you considered whether you can make more optimal use of the existing connections and resources? Permanent Secretary, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question. I believe Mr. Leung would know that on April 1st, 2017, before we had the tax policy unit, I think under the tax coordination committee, we have colleagues from the FSTB who are in charge of tax matters and colleagues from the IRD. Over the last few years, after we set up the TPU, there's not been any change in the officers representing the government on that committee. Of course, we also have to work on the new budget, and for the tax, TPU, I think we will need to liaise with the colleagues and colleagues from the unit will also participate in the work of the tax coordination committee. The TPU and colleagues from the IRD will represent the government to attend the meetings of the tax coordination committee and to communicate with the members in relation of tax matters. Chairman, if you don't mind, I also like to respond to the third question raised by Mr. Chen Jianying, the question regarding resources. As we said in the paper, the newly set up unit and the head of this unit regarding his annual salaries and I think and the other related resources together will total 4.1 million for the senior tax assessors and the senior personal secretary. The staff emoluments, including other benefits, will amount to 3.18 million. Also in the paper, we've said that for those colleagues who are already serving in the TPU and who will migrate to the FSO, I think the staff expenditure annually will be about 3 million. So in total, the amount, I think, short of one vacancy yet to be filled, namely the senior administrative officer salaries. Adding all that together, the total, the PU will have a total of more than $11 million of staff expenditure per annum.
Mr. Kenneth Leung would like to follow up. Well, perhaps the PS did not hear my question very clearly. I was asking whether you would invite some members of the tax liaison unit to be part-time members of your BTPU. Of course, on a pro bono basis. I think that would have involved the specific work arrangements of the BTPU to be set up. Anyway, we've heard Mr. Leung's question. We'll wait until the new head has assumed office, and then he'll be given the flexibility to consider this. Thank you. I'd like to say that I'm for the creation of the two posts. I'm more inclined to fill the post by internal promotion that can enhance the cohesiveness of the team, and it will also facilitate coordination. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, then the administration plans to submit this proposal to the Finance Committee. Any objection, please? If there is no objection, can we have a show of hands? Any objection? Any abstention? Thank you. Thank you.
OK，係啊係啊。我嗰邊開翻呢個圖相，再翻。好，我哋
We move on to item 6. Legislative proposals to further the development of the insurance sector. Can we please invite the officials to join us now?
We'd
like to welcome officials from the Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau and the Insurance Authority. We'll give the floor to Mr. Eddie Zhang, Deputy Secretary for FS&T, to give us a briefing of the legislative proposals. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members of the panel. We'd like to brief members on the legislative proposals from the government to further the development of the insurance sector. My PowerPoint presentation will cover the background proposals, 3 in the main. First, profits tax concessions for the insurance sector. Second, facilitating the issuance of insurance-linked securities or ILS in Hong Kong. Third, expanding the scope of insurable risk by captive insurers set up in Hong Kong. First, the background. The FS budget, and also the C's policy address announced that there would be measures to promote the development of the insurance sector, covering both general insurance, marine insurance, and also specific insurance specialty risks, including catastrophe, war, trade, credit, etc. Some statistics. The insurance sector is developing very well in Hong Kong. Last year, the gross premiums reached over $500 billion. Now, for a general business, they only accounted for about 10% of the total business turnover. And for marine insurance, for the gross premiums globally, we only account for 2.4%. In Asia-Pacific region, we only account for 9.5% of the total amount. Hong Kong is a shipping hub. There are many vessel operators and companies operating in Hong Kong, and they operate as a chain, and marine insurance is an important element. If we want to develop Hong Kong's shipping industry, we must give sufficient support to the marine insurance sector. This is a very simple plan to show you the tax concessions under consideration. We already give 50% concession for general insurance. A company may set up an insurance company to underwrite risks of the group, and the other is professional reinsurers. They only take on reinsurance business. So on this basis, we are going to provide more tax concessions equivalent to 50% to other risks business. Now, currently we only provide tax concessions to captive reinsurance. We're going to provide concessions to direct insurers, providing a medical insurance and also all kinds of insurance, and they may be involved in reinsurance business. They will enjoy 50% tax concession similar to other professional reinsurers. And then we also cover selected business of insurance broker We also cover selected general insurance business, covering catastrophe, war, trade, credit, etc. We give them 50% profits tax concessions, except their local business. We will explain why risk of domestic nature will have to be excluded. Because when we provide tax concessions, we have to be very careful. Our objective is very clear. We want to enhance the international competitiveness of our general industry. We don't want business to be lost to other jurisdictions. So for risks of domestic nature, they do not face a similar problem. So we don't propose to give them the same tax concession. And then we will also cover insurance broker companies. They are all companies. They are advisors to business entities to search for the best insurance solution for companies. For general business such as war and marine, well, if the insurance broker company is in the same business, then they will be entitled to the same level of tax concession as well. And let us explain why. We want to offer 50% tax concession to their profits, and also the scope. Now for marine insurance, in fact, marine insurance is just a very broad term. There are 3 insurance business types included. First is hull and machinery insurance. Second, cargo insurance. Let's say containers have fallen into the ocean. And the third is third-party liability insurance. If the anchor has some yesterday there was just this incident where a pleasure boat ran into the pier, and then specialty risk can cover war, catastrophe, and terrorism. And there are 17 classes of general business under the insurance ordinance. For instance, 6 and 12 can be marine insurance, and then goods in transit and also damage to property can also be linked to marine insurance, and fire and natural forces, etc. Can be put under specialty risk, but we do not have risk called war or catastrophe or terrorism. So it would be very cumbersome and difficult if we want to redefine the specialty risks. So we are saying that all 17 classes of general business will be eligible for the concessions, so that it will not be too cumbersome on companies. For business that will not go to other jurisdictions, they involve the following 5 types of risks of domestic nature: health business, mortgage guarantee business of properties, motor vehicle damage and liability business, employees compensation business, and owners corporation third-party liability business, which is binding on all OCs, because the canopy, for instance, may fall down involving damage to a third party, and they have to be covered. We have to be very careful in providing tax concessions. We have to put in place anti-avoidance provisions. 2 companies may be buying insurance among themselves to cede part of the respective risk, primarily for tax benefit, and such a transaction will not be eligible under the concessions. And we're going to add provisions for ascertainment of the assessable profits of qualifying business to prevent possible tax disputes. This is rather complicated in nature. When the bill is ready, we'll come to explain to the Council what the provisions are. It's worth mentioning that we are very careful in providing concessions to profits, because we're required not to set up a tax system that facilitates tax avoidance by multinationals. So we have to show international organizations whether our proposals suit the best practices, so that we'll not be accused of facilitating avoidance. Now, in 1992, in the U.S., there was the Andrew hurricane, and then insurance companies had to pay out, and then they had to they had already taken out reinsurance. So the whole insurance sector borne the risks of the hurricane, and they were not able to accept reinsurance business. So the risk transfer arrangement or risk sharing was not happening in the sector back then. And then people thought perhaps capital can come from the wealth market, and so they came up with an ILS, insurance-linked securities system, and that is the securitization of risks, that is raising capital from the capital market. So a reinsurance company or insurance company may issue ILS. First, it has to set up a special purpose vehicle, SPV. The SPV and the reinsurance company will set up a risk transfer contract to transfer risk to the SPV.
Because the premium is paid to the SPV. And secondly, the SPV will then issue bonds for institutional investors, normally funds, hedge funds, and so on. And the principal will be paid to the SPV, and the SPV will issue bonds, and the yield will be paid back. The coupons will be paid to the institutional investors. So upon receiving the principal, the SPV will place it in a trust account and make investments. Normally, they will buy government bonds and other reliable forms of investment. Normally, the maturity for these ILS will be 1 to 4 years. This is what happens when the security matures. For example, if the risk is in respect of a hurricane, during the eligible period, let's say there had not been any hurricane, so the investors can get back the principal plus the interest. Normally, the yield or the return will be higher than the yield you get from the bond market. So institutional investors will have the incentive to buy these ILS. It can also help them diversify risk. If they invest in other forms of securities, it is affected by the economic cycle. But if they buy these ILS, so if no cyclones has taken place during the period, then the investor will get the return, and the natural disaster obviously has not connected with the economic cycle, and hence the investor can diversify his risk by buying the ILS. If there is a typhoon, then the reinsurance company will have to pay compensation to the insured by using its own capital, and the return for the investor will be reduced, and that is the risk to be borne by the institutional investor. I said that the ILS basically is more popular in Western countries. In 2017, approximately $12.6 billion was raised via ILS. Bermuda is now the leading jurisdiction for the issuance of ILS, and they take up about 80% of the market share. In Asia, ILS is less common. We now need to amend the ordinance so that we can produce a conducive environment for us to issue ILS. Especially in Asia, we are now facing the risk of climate change. In fact, in Asia, we need to have such risk management tools. And also in Hong Kong, we have the relevant rules and provisions so that we will have a head start in the business, and hence there is a need to amend the ordinance so that to make Hong Kong become a center for the issuance of ILS. We also like to mention that let's talk about the regulatory principles. Now, we must insist that the ILS business that is, if somebody invests in the ILS, the company may go into bankrupt, but there is no default risk because the ILS is fully funded. Actually, in the ordinance, we are now adding one more business, allowing the company to set up an SPV, And in the law, we will call it a special purpose reinsurer for issuing ILS. As I said, any time the SPP has to be fully funded, and it can only restrict the selling of ILS to institutional investors. Our third proposal is rather technical in nature, and that is the captive insurers. In the circuit, you'll find that the captive insurer is an insurance company set up by a group. It's like an umbrella. It can only provide coverage for the companies within the group. According to the law, other than its own companies, the captive insurer can also provide coverage for companies where the parent company has more than 50% stake in its shares, or 20% rather. So this is what the risk that the captive insurers can take. So we're now proposing to expand the coverage represented by the yellow squares. First of all, many holding companies may not have any business in Hong Kong. According to the present ordinance, for these companies which have been set up in Hong Kong, or if they don't have any business in Hong Kong, the captive insurance company cannot take up insurance business. We are proposing to make the relaxation so if the company does not belong to the group, then the group should have at least 20% voting power in that company. So if the group owns a company with less than 20% of the voting power, we will still allow them to provide coverage, but the insurance risk should be equal to the percentage of the ownership. And thirdly, in some cases, for these groups, business groups, they may have a particular area of business like energy, which require professional expertise. So they may have contracts with another company. Let's say another company Y will be responsible for risk management. The group has undertaken the risk, and we suggest that the company will stipulate that company Y will entrust its risk management to the company managed by the group. So the risks of company Y can be actually taken care of by the captive insurer. So we are now exploring what else Hong Kong can do to help them develop business. Captive insurer is a very good risk management tool to help major business groups to manage the multinational risk. So everything that we've talked about so far involve multinational investments. Say, for example, in Central Asia, countries with higher risk or countries that they are not familiar with, very rarely would they invest more than 20% into the stake of any such company. So they may only own, say, for example, 5% of the stakes. So if we make the relaxation, then even such risk could be, undertaken by the captive insurers. So these captive insurers set up in Hong Kong can become a tool for these multinational companies to manage the global risk management. Financial implications. Of course, the government and the insurance authority will absorb the resources needed to implement the proposals. Members may wish to note that to learn about the impact on the tax revenue. Right now, it's difficult to make that estimate. It would depend on whether the market would mature and whether in providing for these concessions, we need to amend our tax ordinance, our Inland Revenue Ordinance. We target to introduce the relevant bills, amendment bills to LegCo in 2019-2020, and that is to amend the IRO to provide property tax concessions, and also the insurance ordinance to facilitate the issuance of ILS in Hong Kong and to expand the scope of the insurable risks by captive insurers. The proposals have to be in line with the latest developments in order to avoid being regarded as harmful tax practices. So the final proposals may be different from what I'm, presenting to members today. So that's the end of my presentation, and questions are welcome. Thank you very much. 3 members would like to speak. May we suggest 4 minutes each. Mr. Chen Zhenying, thank you. First of all, I'd like to declare that I am a consultant for the Bank of China, and in our group we also offer life insurance business. Of course, I support the proposal to further develop the insurance sector. Insurance industry, financial industry, and banking industry are pillars of the financial market, so I therefore support the proposal. But I have a few technical questions. First of all, in slide number 6, namely the proposed profit tax concessions, there are 2 parts. The captive insurance, that's very clear. And you also mentioned for the original reinsurance company, you did not cover the insurance brokers. Why is it that you are proposing to cover the insurance brokers as well? And secondly, in PowerPoint number 8, you say there are 5 types of businesses which will be excluded. For these 5 types of businesses, I'd like to ask the government whether you've consulted the insurance industry, whether that's adequate. Because some of these businesses I'm not too familiar with. For example, when we travel and lose our luggage, would that not count as part of the domestic insurance and therefore they are excluded? Finally, slide number 16, you say that the captive insurance companies can also undertake risk management businesses. But since he has the capacity to handle risk management, they can also manage the risk management of other companies. It's not part of the business of the group. So could you set a cap here so that they cannot, for example, specialize entirely on risk management and set a cap at 30% or 50%? 3 questions. Thank you, Mr. Chan. First of all, I must say, explain why we offer the tax concessions to the insurance companies. The role of the insurance company is to give advice, or the insurance brokers to provide advice to its clients so that it can help the client find the best insurance solutions in the market, including where to purchase the insurance policy for example, catastrophe risk. Even if the vessel were in Hong Kong, they may not need to take up insurance in Hong Kong. They could do so in Singapore or London. So if the tax concessions were offered to the insurance brokers, we hope that will provide the incentive for the insurance broker to conduct such business in Hong Kong, so that Hong Kong's insurance industry could become more competitive compared with their peers in other jurisdictions. For these insurance brokers, they are typically multinational scale of a large scale. I won't mention any names, but they are not the so-called insurance agents, but rather they are professional insurance brokers. To answer your third question regarding the cap, indeed there will be one. In other words, they must have, legal documents to show that the group is responsible to shoulder such risks, and what are such risks, and the amount involved. The IA will be playing the role of the gatekeeper, and they will be setting a cap. For such details, the IA will be issuing guidelines to clearly explain how they will come up with the cap. Regarding liaison with the local insurance industry, I will defer to the IA to answer the question. Basically, it's been the IA which has been liaising with the industry.
Mr. Chen, regarding your second question, in exploring proposals 1 and 3, we already studied with the industry and tax experts to see in what ways the government can promote the development of the insurance industry. Their response was very positive. Would it be at the early stage of studying the proposals, and even when we were drafting the proposals, we were in communication with the industry, and we will continue to do so. 5 industry insurance business would be excluded from the tax concessions in order to support our objective to make Hong Kong an important insurance hub. And those business accounts for about already 20 or 70%, 70% of our business. And what we propose here wants to attract business, the remaining share of business, and they are from overseas in particular. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. To further the development of the insurance industry, the government has come up with proposals, and of course, as someone from the industry, of course, we support that. Well, the tax concessions will benefit the industry, but what about the policy holders to the insured? Will there be any benefit? Now, concessions should benefit the industry as well as the general policy owners. And I think this will make the policy more successful if we can benefit both parties. So is there anything from the administration to let both the insurer and the insured to feel happy? You may say so, but rather indirectly. Let me use this PowerPoint to show you my point. Now we'll talk about marine insurance and underwriting of specialty risk. We need people with the expertise, including brokers. Brokers are in fact insurance advisors. They know different types of specialty risks, and there are also captive managers in managing captive insurance. Now, if we provide tax concessions to attract this business to come, then our talents will come with them. Now, for general insurance, we are short of talent. How can we attract people to join the trade? Of course, we have done something to enhance the public's understanding of what insurance is. And the best incentive is for the business to grow big, and then salaries and wages can increase. In Hong Kong, if you want to seek underwriting of a more complicated risk, we do not have such talents in Hong Kong. So for multinational companies, those stationed in Hong Kong, they may have to consult their teams in London or other countries. They have to consult or seek the advice of their team members overseas before they can conclude a deal with their clients in Hong Kong. And that means time lost during the consultation period. In 2015, London did a comparison of various insurance hubs. Hong Kong lost out in terms of a lack of expertise. We cannot offer a lot to attract experts to come. The only thing we can do is to let the market grow so the talents will come to Hong Kong, and I think this will be good. Of course, manpower is important. But what is the point of having those talents in Hong Kong just to develop their business? If we have someone here who will only take up our resources, and if they cannot perform, they cannot boost their business, then it's useless. Now, you talked about professionals, professional brokers. They have to advise clients on companies and reinsurers they should choose. I think it's most important for the insured to gain financially, for instance, concessions in premiums. As a result of our profits tax concessions, the burden on insurance companies will be lightened, and then they should reduce, or they should offer lower premiums. I think this is an important aspect in promoting the business of the sector. So insurance companies or the risks may not be of a domestic nature, and the premiums are usually of considerable value, and the government should think about this. You should not just use profits tax concessions to attract talents. The most important thing is to attract business to Hong Kong. And a supplement, I cannot agree more with what Mr. Wong said. I hope that when insurance companies see their costs lower as a result of the profits tax concessions, we will be most happy to see if they can reduce the level of premiums. All right, we have these proposals. That is just the first round. We're still discussing with the sector on measures to further promote the development of the industry. When we have some proposals, we'll come back to the panel to brief members. Mr. Holden Chow, thank you. I've got two questions. The first, in relation to para 13 of the paper, catastrophe bond. Because of severe climate change globally, in fact, catastrophe bond is a high-risk investment tool. And according to the paper, to enhance protection to consumers, this product is only available to institutional investors. Can you explain to us what further measures do you have? Now, the bonds cannot be sold to retail investors. Can you ensure that the product will not be transformed or disguised so that they can be sold to individuals, investors, as a further safeguard? Given that this is a very high-risk product, it will only be sold to institutional investors, but will MPFs be allowed to invest in catastrophe bonds? Will trustees be allowed to invest MPF benefits in this kind of product? And my second question is very similar to Mr. Wong Ting Kwong's. Now, you want to cut tax in order to attract more business to Hong Kong. It's true that for marine insurance, this is a response to the aspiration of the industry. This is a positive move. However, after the tax concessions, we have further measures. You will cover lease of ships and also vessel owners. We should have a chain of measures to attract vessels to be registered in Hong Kong. They fly our own flags. And then I'd like to know whether the government has further measures to attract marine business back to Hong Kong. Thank you. I fully subscribe to Mr. Odin Chow's views. Together with the SFC, we are studying measures. We will consider. Now, in the primary market, only institutional investors are allowed, but can the product be further split down so that retail investors can also invest? We are now studying this issue. I thank Mr. Chow for his comments. And for MPF, there are regulations on investing in high-risk products. The cap for investing in high-risk products will be 10%. ILS is not something, is not suitable for a long-term investment for the sake of retirement, because usually the term is only 1 to 4 years for an ILS, so it is not really suitable for MPF investment. So Mr. Chow need not worry that it will become an investment tool for MPF. And in fact, for the marine industry, it is an important chain, and then we have also liaised with the Association of Ship Owners. Perhaps Mr. Lam can help to supplement. Thank you. Regarding marine insurance, the government would like to target at the whole industry chain of marine business. So we want to develop marine insurance and also underwriting of specialty risk. If you look at the marine insurance market globally and in the Asia-Pacific region, there is a lot of room for further development in Hong Kong. So we are offering profits tax concessions, and we should target at the industry at source. If by means of this concession, we can attract stakeholders of the industry chain to come to do business in Hong Kong, then we are tackling it at source. And we are proposing profits tax concessions here. And Mr. Chow talked about a leasing of ships. I understand that the government is doing something on this front, and of course the targets will be different. For the FSTB and the IA, our main target is insurance companies, and for the THB, they target as ship owners. So we are giving support to different stakeholders in the whole industry chain. Mr. Chen Kim-po, let me declare I am the executive officer of an insurance company, and of course I welcome measures from the government to make Hong Kong an international insurance hub. I support all the proposals in the paper, and I'd like to tell you the views of the industry. Now, these proposals are very professional and technical in nature. The views of the insurance sector is very important, so that in terms of implementation, we can bring the best benefits to the industry. So the government needs the support of the sector. So even after the proposals are approved, you need our continuous input. Now, we have to ensure that our concessions would not lose out to our competitors, including Singapore and other jurisdictions. So we must keep improving our regime. And for catastrophe insurance, of course, it is a very good direction, but it is very technical in nature, and we have to see how they will be attracted to come to Hong Kong. In the mainland, they have catastrophes such as earthquakes and hurricanes. Well, there is a lot of market potential there, so we should enhance cooperation with the mainland so that because when SPVs are set up, there must be business as well. The government should offer more support in attracting business. Mr. Jeffrey Lam.
Thank you. I think the proposal aims at enhancing the competitive edge of the insurance industry, and the proposals include tax concessions for the industry. In slide number 10, I think you explain how the bonds are issued. I understand these bonds will be issued to institutional investors rather than retail investors. I said that this proposal is to enhance the competitiveness of the insurance industry. There are insurance companies of different sizes. If you only allow the institutional investors rather than retail investors to buy these products, are there any restrictions for these large institutional investors to sell these products after they procure them? For the insurance industry, what will be the impact? Thank you. First of all, for the ILS, what is the purpose and nature of the ILS? It is actually a form of reinsurance. An insurance company will undertake risk, and the IA would require the insurer to take up reinsurance, so that the whole purpose is to diversify the risk, so that when something unfortunate happens, not a single insurer will have to shoulder the full responsibility. For ILS, why is it the same as reinsurance? Because the whole risk is being packaged in the form of a security for institutional investors to buy. So for the insurer, it can diversify its risk. So insurance companies, large or small, can all benefit, because for most of these ILS, they are issued by reinsurers. The benefit for the industry is that whether the industry is large or small, the whole insurance industry will be able to raise capital from the capital market, and therefore they will be able to undertake more risk. Without such capital, then there was a limit to the extent of risk that they can undertake. So one can say that both large and small insurance companies will be able to benefit. As for the question of tax concessions, for the issuance of ILS, there won't be any tax concessions. As for what, like Mr. Chen Kim-po said, we need to actually monitor what our competitors are doing, and whether we will offer tax concessions to make Hong Kong a more attractive place for the issuance of ILS. We certainly consider that in future. I have a question for the IA. What can you do to promote new products? For example, when the Macau Bridge was launched, many drivers would like to try driving on the bridge. But the insurance, premium for a year or quarter is very expensive compared with the risks of that bridge. It's not commensurate with the number of times the vehicle owner would like to drive on that bridge. Some drivers only want to drive on the bridge once a week. So now that you have a new phenomenon or something new happening in the market, but for different reasons, the insurance company may not really offer a product that will suit the needs of the public. So what can the IA do to help? In the long term, for example, the Monetary Authority can, through the mortgage-backed corporation, launch products. One example would be the annuities. So my question is that in some situations, I don't know whether the IA may need to come up with a communal insurance plan to satisfy the needs of the community for things which the insurance company is not willing to undertake the risk. Deputy Secretary? Now, let me answer the last part of your question first. If there are certain risks in the market where the premium is very expensive and the public cannot take up coverage with the insurance companies, well, the Federation of Insurers has a mechanism. If somebody in Hong Kong cannot take up a certain form of insurance coverage, despite his attempts, many attempts, then he will look at the case with the insurance company to see whether or not they can provide the coverage. In the past, the Federation of Insurers have come up with, a mechanism so that the construction industry can take up a coverage that they were not able to do before. For vehicle insurance for cars, traveling on the Hong Kong China Macau Bridge, I'll ask Mr. Lam from the IA to elaborate. Regarding the vehicle insurance for vehicles driving on the bridge. During the first phase of the commission of the bridge, given the bridge actually straddles the waters of Hong Kong, Macau and the mainland, for Hong Kong residents driving to Macau, they will need to travel through the waters of the mainland, so he will need to take up insurance coverage for the three jurisdictions. So the important thing is that we need to ensure that the public can take up insurance coverage for the three jurisdictions. We are now working with the authorities in the mainland of Macau so that residents in Hong Kong can take up the coverage through a one-stop service. Given that the bridge is new, so for short-term insurance policies, the practice in the three places are different. In Hong Kong, we can provide a very short-term coverage. In the mainland of Macau, given for historical reasons and the state of the market, they are not able to offer such short-term coverage for, say, a week, 2 weeks, or 3 months. So we are now collecting views, and we are now liaising with the mainland. Hopefully they will understand that people who need to use the bridge will only use it for a short-term purpose. Secondly, we also understand that people have the aspiration that there could be a one-stop service for them to take up insurance coverage straddling the three jurisdictions, so that a single policy can offer coverage for the three jurisdictions. Given that we are talking about third-party insurance involving Hong Kong, Macau, and the mainland, and the regulators in the three jurisdictions are involved, we have been actively liaising with them so that hopefully we can come up with a service that is convenient for the consumers in three jurisdictions. We are now liaising with our counterparts on that at the moment. Holden Chow. Just one more point. I'd like to thank the Bureau for the explanation. Regarding the catastrophe bond, like the Bureau said, given that it's a high-risk product, it's not suitable for retirees to invest in. So I hope that when you launch the proposal, you can tell the funds, MPF fund managers, that they should invest in these catastrophe bonds so that we can protect the retirees. Right. Any further points? If not, I also like to make a comment. I also support the proposed amendments. I also like Mr. Holden like to thank Mr. Holden Chow for making the point that the listing of these catastrophe bonds reminds us of the Lehman Brothers, debacle. So I thank the Bureau for clarifying that these products are only for institutional investors. The other question was whether or not such products will be further split up and sold to retail investors. The answer we're given is that they would not. And I think the Permanent Secretary has done a good job, and I therefore support the proposed amendments. So thank you very much, Undersecretary PS and Mr. Lam, for your detailed explanation. Thank you.
咁我哋咧就會將呢個草案咧呈交立法會嘅財務小組
稍後政府會入條例嘅，稍後睇下。
呢個稍後係嘛？
冇嘢㗎啦，佢都支持㗎啦。
So I think we should support the bill. We're now on to item number 7. That is the legislative framework for group-wide supervision of insurance groups. Again, the PS will stay and walk us through this item. If I can make a start, and our colleagues from the IA are now joining us. So this paper briefed members on our proposal to improve the regulatory framework for the supervision of the insurance groups, where the holding companies is in Hong Kong. First, the background. First of all, we have to fully comply with the minimum international standard to regulate the insurance groups. There is the IAIS, which has issued some regulatory guidelines, one of which is that for insurance companies, other than regulating single insurance companies, we need to also monitor the business of the entire group. For an insurance group, inevitably the regulator would need to work with other regulators. So that is an international requirement. If a multinational insurance group is involved, insurance regulators of various jurisdictions would collaborate to appoint a group supervisor or a supervisory college, and amongst the members of the college, they will nominate one member to regulate the insurance group. So a group may comprise of different companies. Some may not be in the insurance business. It could be in banking or insurance or financial businesses. So we have to, first of all, identify the company. We have to also find out which is the parent company, and also within the group, which of the companies should be regulated by the regulatory college. As I said, for an insurance group, there may be one subsidiary which is only involved in AI or fintech business, and that company may not have any significant impact on the financial stability of the group. So the regulator can decide that this is not within the scope of regulation. So that's one example. The third point, more importantly, is the third point, that the head company could be an insurance company, and it will naturally fall under the regulatory framework of the regulation college. So the college will have the legal authority to regulate the company. But if the head company is only a holding company without any substantive business, so the holding company will not fall under the scope of regulation by the regulator, which means that you have a vacuum here. That is, the regulator cannot regulate the holding company of the insurance company. And that is why we need to amend the law in order to empower the regulator to identify the head company, which is a holding company, and that its regulatory power would be extended to the holding company. And this is exactly what is stipulated in the guideline of the IAIS. Last time, when IMF assessed whether or not our regulatory framework was up to international standard, they proposed that we should amend our ordinance as soon as possible to authorize our regulator to also regulate the holding company.
主要咧
Our proposal is to allow the IA to consider the following factors in deciding whether to designate a Hong Kong incorporated insurance holding company as being subject to group-wide supervision. Now, if the holding, the head company is a holding company that is incorporated in Hong Kong, it will fall within our scope. So the IA will consider a number of factors in deciding whether the holding company should be subject to a group-wide supervision. First, whether the relevant supervisory college has agreed to appoint IA as the group supervisor for the insurance group. The supervisory company is formed by insurance regulators of various jurisdictions. And then we have to consider the number of jurisdictions outside of Hong Kong in which the subsidiaries within the insurance group carry on insurance company. Now, the head company is a holding company incorporated in Hong Kong. But does that mean that Hong Kong should be responsible for the supervisor? Well, it depends on whether the majority of its insurance business is in Hong Kong. If the majority of it is outside Hong Kong, then we have to reconsider whether our IA should be the supervisor. And the third is the size of business of the insurance group. If the size is too small, the regulators may not find it worthwhile to spend so much resources to supervise or regulate the insurance group. And we have to consider relevant criteria promulgated by international insurance standard setting bodies. For instance, requirements on capital. The requirements may be updated from time to time, and the such criteria may have an impact on the IA's decision as to whether designate such company as being subject to group-wide supervision. Now, if a designated insurance holding company shall pay annual fee and user fee to IA for IA to recover the regulatory costs, and the supervision can include in a change in its responsible persons. In determining the scope of the designated insurance group, IA will consider the consolidated financial statements of the group, because under a certain group, there may be companies not engaged in financial business. It may be in the development of AI, for instance, and therefore that company has no bearing on the soundness and also financial strength of the group concerned. And IAIS has got guidelines. The first step to consider whether a group should be a designated insurance group should be to consider should be the consolidated financial statements of the group. Now, if a company if a group is a designated insurance group, and if the companies to be covered are already determined, then the appointment of the chief executive directors, key persons in control functions, and of a person who has a significant shareholding control in a designated insurance company is required the prime concern of IA. And how does IA consider whether the appointment should be allowed? The IA will consider whether that person is fit or no longer fit and proper person. Because if the person is no longer fit and proper, then IA may object and revoke the approval. And this is similar to existing powers for the IA to regulate an insurance company. Now, IAs will consider the capital requirements, the appointment of an auditor, and submission of financial information and returns, so on and so forth. Under the current legislation, IA already has similar powers for regulating an insurance company. The only new power here is when such a group engages in an M&A exercise, then it has to comply with acquisition requirements. Now we're talking about major acquisitions. IA will set out objective criteria to define what is a major acquisition. As for intervention powers, if IA's intervention is warranted, IA may ask for information and production of documents. It may obtain a skilled person's report. It may restrict the transfer of assets within the insurance group to protect policyholders. And if there is a doubt as to the financial stability of the company concerned, the IA may appoint a manager. In fact, is to take over the management of the company. And directions may also be given to the company for remedy measures to ensure financial stability. These are, again, existing powers under the current legislation for regulating an insurance company. Now, inspection, investigation, and disciplinary actions are very simple. Again, it's just extending the powers to a lead company. Now, capital requirements. This is important in banks and financial institutions. And for an insurance company, we have to consider the insolvency ratio as well. Again, we have to fulfill international standards. But IAIS is still working on its guidelines on insolvency requirements. So our proposal is to make subsidiary legislation in the future to reflect the latest guidelines from IAIS, and the subleg is subject to negative vetting by the Council. We don't want to include it in the principal ordinance because the requirements can be changed from time to time. In fact, this is on par to the regulation for banks. And the capital requirements are entirely risk-based. When there are new requirements, and we will ensure that there is sufficient time for insurance companies to adapt, because more capital may be needed to fulfill the insolvency requirements, and we should give a reasonable period of time for insurance groups to comply. We've already consulted the industry, and we've also consulted insurance groups of holding companies incorporated in Hong Kong. There's been a very in-depth discussion with the stakeholders. We will amend the insurance ordinance, we expect to submit relevant amendments to the Council in the 2019-20 legislative session. Let me reiterate, we attach a lot of significance to communication of the industry. We'll continue to engage them, and then we will work with them on the details of the group-wide supervision framework. Again, this is a very complicated proposal, and if I haven't explained the proposals clearly, I'm happy to take questions from members. The chairman is off mic. Two members have got questions. Mr. Ronik Chen, 4 minutes, okay? Thank you, Chairman. My first question relates to the following. Now, we have to comply with international standards in introducing regulatory measures of insurance groups. It's important that we do not drive them away as a result. In paragraph 4, it is said that European countries, Bermuda and Singapore have already introduced such measures. But what about the US and Canada and Australia? Will insurance groups be driven to these countries after we have introduced the new regulatory regime? As for fit and proper person, now the chief executive officer and directors and key persons, etc., will have to be approved by the IA prior to their appointment. Now, for multinational insurance groups, usually these key persons are those who have served in different countries, and whenever the Hong Kong MA wants to conduct check integrity, a vetting of these officers, they usually take a long time. I'd like to know whether the IA is going to take as long. And the PS has elaborated on the capital requirements. In the introduction, in the early stage of the regulatory regime, the international standards are not yet available. Will you just add the capital requirements of different members of the insurance group, and that will be the capital requirement for the whole group? Whether insurance groups will be driven away, whether the new regulatory regime will undermine our competitiveness in the insurance sector. The answer is no, because our basis is to fulfill international standards. We have no intention to exceed the US and the UK in our regulatory measures. When the holding company is incorporated in Hong Kong, we, as the regulator, has the responsibility to ensure proper regulation of the group. And this will be conducive to enhancing our reputation as a world insurance and financial center. Ms. Hui, in the whole amendment process, we have two major principles to go by. First, we have to suit the actual requirements, and that is the overall requirement by IAIS. We have to closely follow the international developments and requirements in regulation of insurance groups. And secondly, we're not going to exceed or to surpass the regulatory standards of the US and the UK. We just want to ensure that insurance groups, when operating in Hong Kong, can maintain our global competitiveness. So the two principles will apply. And as for whether the key persons are fit and proper persons. In vetting key persons, we apply the same standards for both holding companies and also groups. We follow international standards. If IAIS has given us a guideline on the key persons of companies groups. Now, whether we are considering companies on a solo basis or insurance groups, the standards will just be the same. For the calculation of capital requirements, the international standards are still being developed. We are a member of the IAIS. We will closely follow their discussions in this matter. And for capital requirements, we also closely follow their latest developments.
We have been liaising with the industry to find out about the operations and the difficulties that they are encountering. And one more point we mentioned just now about the transitional arrangement. In that regard, we have considered the timing factor for the regulation of the insurance group. We've taken that in consideration. So as far as transitional arrangements are concerned, we'll ensure that insurance groups operating in Hong Kong will be able to have a smooth transition. Next. Mr. Chen Kim Paul. Thank you. Of course, I support the proposal. In fact, this is actually in compliance with the requirements of the IAIS as to how we can, fight for more insurance groups to be incorporated in Hong Kong, because that can help these companies to make Hong Kong the headquarters, and that will be beneficial in terms of employment and so on for Hong Kong. I understand the IA and Ms. Hui has been maintaining very close liaison with the insurance industry, and we have a very cordial relationship. So we have to ensure that we have to comply with the legal requirements, but they understand the difficulties that we face. So what we are now proposing to do, I hope we will not have standards more stringent than other jurisdictions, otherwise the insurance companies will leave. And in the third PowerPoint, you talk about the Federation of Insurance Regulators, or the college, regulatory college, which can determine which jurisdiction is responsible for the supervision of the insurance groups. Well, is the choice of the insurance company itself also a major consideration? Now, who would like to take the question? Thank you. Ms. Hui. In the supervisory college, there is a procedure for the members to discuss under what circumstances how the election should be done, and they will have to all take part in the college to decide how to elect which jurisdiction should be the supervisor. The factors to be considered include, for example, the insurance business. What is the scale? What is the proportion of the insurance business of that group in respect of that jurisdiction? And secondly, in a jurisdiction where the regulator is located, in terms of the supervision of the insurance group, whether it has the experience of regulating insurance groups, and also whether its regulatory framework and legal and the laws will also be considered. In choosing which jurisdiction should be the regulator of the insurance group, I think the college will have a detailed discussion, and there will be an election process to elect the regulator. I also like to stress that insurance companies in Hong Kong are facing more and more stringent regulations and are operating difficult environment, getting more difficult. I understand that the proposal will only affect a few insurance companies, but I still hope that these major insurance groups will choose Hong Kong to be the headquarters, and more insurance companies will come to Hong Kong. Despite this ordinance, I think we need only to comply with the basic international requirements. We don't need to outperform or outdo any other jurisdictions. We're already seeing signs that the rules are being relaxed in other jurisdictions. So I hope Hong Kong can remain a competitive, an attractive jurisdiction for the insurance industry to come to Hong Kong, especially given the many opportunities in the mainland. I hope Hong Kong will remain still a competitive place. Is anyone else who would like to speak? If not, I'd like to thank the officials for the detailed presentation. Thank you very much. The bill will be submitted to LegCo in the 2019-2020 session. Any comment? So members are all in support of that. Thank you. Item 3. Any other business? We do not have any other business, so I declare the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.